My dad bought me long-sleeved shirts for 3 years and never wondered why I refused to take them off. My mother only wanted to burn one of her children, me. Not my younger sister with her participation trophies. Just me, the eldest daughter who reflected poorly on the family. When I was 11, we were all doing homework when my dad noticed me flinch while writing. "What's wrong with Sylvia's hand?" Before I could speak, I felt Mom's perfectly manicured nails on my shoulder. "Oh, she touched the stove earlier while helping me cook. Didn't you, honey?" My dad kissed my forehead, completely unaware my own mother was burning me for every little mistake. Every evening at 6:55 p.m., while Dad was getting ready for his night shift, Mom would inspect my assignments with a magnifying glass. 97%, she'd announce that particular evening, her voice tight with disappointment. 3 points from perfect. You know what that means. "But Mom, the teacher said it was excellent." I was cut off by the sound of her lighting the candle. "Hold your hand over it. 30 seconds for each point you missed." My little sister Jasmine's papers got smiley faces and good job stickers for her B's. Mine got inspected for microscopic flaws. "Mom, please, it hurts." "Shh." She pressed a finger to her lips. "Do you hear that? That's Dad's car starting. Unless you want Jasmine to learn about perfection too, you'll be a good girl." I tried to tell my dad indirectly, but I gave signs. "Is it normal for your hands to shake when you write?" I asked him once during breakfast. My mom's laugh was light and practiced. Perfectionist tendencies. I was the same at her age, always pushing herself too hard. By winter, things were falling apart in ways even Mom couldn't hide. I couldn't even sit down without wincing. After a teacher noticed the burns during PE, my punishment was watching the family throw Jasmine a party for her report card, while Mom stayed behind at home with me. That was the first time she introduced what she labeled furnace time, where I stood in front of the living room fire in as little clothes as possible. That was when I stopped fighting. I looked at my scarred hands one morning and didn't see the damage everyone else saw. I saw what Mom had been telling me for years. Imperfect, flawed, deserving of punishment. "You're right," I told her after getting a 99% on my math test. "I'm imperfect. I deserve to burn." For the first time in 2 years, she looked uncertain. "Well, it was only 1 point off." "No, imperfection is imperfection. You were right, Mom." You see, we both knew what would happen if I took it too far. CPS visit, maybe a group home. But I was too obsessed with fixing myself to care anymore. To fight fire with fire, if you will. Lowell. And at school the next day, I got my essay back. 94%. As soon as I got home, I stuck my head into the oven over and over. After the 6th time, my mom was begging me to stop with tears in her eyes. "No, Mom. I'm broken. I was born broken and need to be fixed." It was her words, now being echoed in my mouth. A week later was the academic awards ceremony. I won the Excellence Award, the highest GPA in my grade. Walking to the stage felt like moving through smoke. As I reached up to accept the trophy, my sleeves rode down, revealing extensive scarring up both arms. The principal grabbed my wrist in shock. "It's okay," I said calmly into the mic. "I got a 98 on that test. I deserved it." I believed every word. "Sylvia." Dad's voice cut through everything. He was standing, finally seeing what the long sleeves had hidden, the layers upon layers of scar tissue, systematic patterns of punishment marking every imperfection. Mom rushed the stage like she'd been shot from a cannon. "She's troubled. She does this to herself." Dad's entire face changed as everything clicked at once. Mom yanked on the part of my arm most littered with burns, and suddenly my white shirt was being stained with blood. The last thing I heard before I passed out was Jasmine's voice, high and scared, finally telling the truth. Mom made me watch. She said if I wasn't perfect, I'd be next. I woke up in the hospital to the sound of Dad crying. 3 years, he kept saying. 3 years of scars, and I worked nights through all of it. The social worker's voice was professionally calm, but I could hear the disgust. "Mr. Hayes, she's been systematically abused for approximately 3 years. The scarring patterns indicate escalating punishment methods. If she'd continued this pattern of self-harm belief, we'd be having a very different conversation." Mom played her last card from across the room where an officer was watching her. "He made me do it," she said, voice steady as a snake. "He's obsessed with having perfect daughters." I was protecting her from worse. And as I sat in the hospital room, surrounded by burn cream and bandages, I smiled, because I knew what I had to do to get revenge on Mom and make it right. I lifted my hands first, turning them over slowly under the harsh hospital lights. The bandages wrapped around my arms felt thick and foreign, layer after layer of white gauze covering what 3 years of punishment looked like documented on skin. I counted them without thinking. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 layers on my left arm, 6 on my right where the burns went deeper. Dad sat in the corner chair with his face buried in his hands, his shoulders shaking every few seconds with sounds I'd never heard him make before. A man in a gray suit stood by the door holding a clipboard, watching us both with careful eyes that took in everything. He had the look of someone who'd seen bad things before, but this was still hitting him hard. "Wayne Rogers," his badge said when he stepped closer. "Social worker." The words on his ID card made my stomach drop because I knew what came next. What had to come next, and there was no going back from here. He cleared his throat and Dad's head snapped up, eyes red and swollen. Wayne's voice came out steady and professional, the kind of calm that didn't match the absolute chaos spinning through my head. "I would stay in the hospital for medical treatment while they investigated everything," he explained. "Mom wasn't allowed anywhere near me. Not in this building. Not through phone calls. not through anyone else trying to pass messages. Dad made a choking sound when Wayne mentioned temporary custody arrangements, like the reality of it just punched him in the chest. His face showed everything clicking into place all at once. How bad this really was. How long it had been happening. How completely he'd missed it. 3 years, he said again, his voice cracking on the words. 3 years of scars, and I worked nights through all of it. He kept repeating it like he was trying to make the number make sense, trying to fit 3 years of systematic abuse into the space where he thought everything was fine. I felt anger start bubbling up hot and sharp in my chest because he was there the whole time, just on a different schedule, just tired enough or trusting enough to miss every single sign I tried to give him. Wayne moved closer to Dad's chair and his voice got gentler but firmer. Guilt won't help right now, he said. Cooperation with the investigation will. Dad nodded like a broken toy, his head bobbing up and down while tears kept running down his face. A woman knocked on the door holding a professional camera with a huge flash attachment. Forensic photographer, Wayne told me quietly. She needs to document your injuries for evidence. Do you consent? I said yes immediately, the word coming out stronger than I expected. I wanted pictures that told the truth Mom couldn't talk her way around. Images that showed exactly what perfection cost when you measured it in burned skin. The photographer worked methodically, asking me to hold my arms different ways, to turn so she could capture the marks on my hands, to lift my shirt so she could photograph my back where furnace time left its patterns. I held completely still for each shot, feeling something shift inside me from shame to purpose. These weren't secrets anymore. They were evidence. Through the hospital room window, I could see down the hallway to another room where a police officer sat in a chair outside the door. Wayne noticed me looking and explained that Mom was in that room, under observation, claiming I did all this to myself as some kind of mental health crisis. The disgust that flooded through me was so strong I almost laughed out loud, the sound catching in my throat. Of course she'd try to flip the script when she finally got caught. Of course she'd make herself the victim and me the troubled kid who needed help. My hands clenched into fists under the bandages and the pain that shot through them felt almost grounding. Where's Jasmine? I asked, and my voice cracked hard on her name. Wayne's expression softened and he told me she was with a temporary caregiver being kept safe while they arranged her forensic interview. The protective panic that crashed over me was stronger than any pain from my burns, stronger than the anger at Dad, stronger than everything else. I needed to know she was okay, that Mom hadn't gotten to her, that she wasn't being punished for telling the truth. Wayne seemed to read my face because he added quickly that the caregiver was experienced, and Jasmine was physically safe. I exhaled halfway, not quite relief, but close enough. Wayne pulled a chair up next to my bed and sat down with his clipboard balanced on his knee. He asked me to walk him through exactly how the punishments worked, and when I started helping by burning myself. I told him everything in a flat voice that sounded like someone else talking, like I was reading a report instead of describing my own life. The candle timings, I said. 30 seconds for each percentage point missed. The percentage point system where 97 meant 90 seconds over the flame. The furnace sessions where I stood in front of the living room fire in as little clothes as possible. The threats about Jasmine. How Mom said if I wasn't perfect, she'd be next. Wayne wrote it all down without looking shocked or horrified, just steady and thorough, and I watched his pen move across the paper without crying, because I'd cried enough already. Dad made sounds from his chair during some parts, little gasps or groans that he tried to muffle. When I finished, Wayne had filled 3 full pages of notes. Dad's voice came out rough and hesitant, asking Wayne if he could be considered for placement once I was released. He admitted right there that he worked nights to avoid conflict with Mom, that he missed every sign because he was too tired or too trusting or maybe just too willing to believe everything was fine. Wayne said they'd evaluate him, but he'd need to complete parenting classes and individual therapy first. That good intentions didn't erase what happened, but consistent effort could rebuild trust. I felt my anger soften just slightly at his honesty, at him actually admitting he failed instead of making excuses. My mind drifted back to standing on that stage at the awards ceremony with the microphone in my hand, my sleeves sliding down my arms as I reached for the trophy. I remembered the entire auditorium going silent as they saw the truth laid out in scar tissue, systematic patterns that couldn't be hidden anymore. The principal's hand on my wrist, the shock on every face, Mom rushing the stage. The realization hit me fresh that a room full of people witnessed my revelation, which meant Mom couldn't claim this was private or exaggerated or something I made up later. There were witnesses, video footage, public documentation of the moment everything came out. Wayne pulled out some papers and started going over the no-contact order being put in place. No phone calls, no messages, no contact through third parties, no showing up anywhere I might be. He asked for my phone so he could block Mom's number and any way she might try to reach me. I handed it over even though giving up control of my phone felt wrong after years of monitoring my own behavior, checking for messages, making sure I responded perfectly. I forced myself to let go of it, watching Wayne's fingers tap through settings and block numbers. The phone looked small in his hands, and I realized I didn't want it back right away, didn't want the temptation to check if she'd tried to reach me, or the anxiety of waiting for her to try. Wayne tucked my phone into his briefcase and told me he'd keep it safe until I felt ready to have it back, which might be days or weeks, and that was okay. He gathered his clipboard and papers, said he'd be back tomorrow to check on me, and left the room with a quiet click of the door. Dad stayed in his chair by the window, staring at his hands like he was seeing them for the first time. The silence between us felt heavy, but not hostile, just exhausted. A nurse came in to check my vitals around 8 p.m., adjusted my IV, and dimmed the lights before leaving us in the blue glow of the monitor screens. Dad eventually said goodnight and headed to a hotel Wayne had arranged, and I was alone in the hospital bed with nothing to plan or hide or calculate for the first time in 3 years. That night, I slept without setting mental alarms for 6:55 p.m., or rehearsing excuses for visible burns, or checking my assignments one more time for errors that might cost me skin. The freedom should have felt good, but instead the nightmares came hard and fast. Flames licking up my arms while a timer counted down, Mom's voice saying imperfect over and over in a loop, percentage signs burning into my palms, test papers covered in red marks that turned into actual blood. I woke up gasping around 3 a.m. with my heart pounding and sweat soaking through the hospital gown. The panic took a few seconds to fade, and when it did, I realized someone was standing by my bed. Natasha Elliott, the night nurse, was checking my vitals with gentle hands and kind eyes that didn't look shocked or disgusted by my scars. She asked if I wanted water, and I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. She poured a cup from the pitcher, helped me sit up slightly, and stayed quiet while I drank. When I handed the cup back, she asked if the nightmares were bad, and I managed to say yes. She told me that was normal after trauma, that my brain was processing what happened, and that it would get easier, but it would take time. Something about her calm acceptance made my chest loosen just slightly. She adjusted my blankets, checked the bandages on my arms, and told me to press the call button if I needed anything before she moved on to her other patients. I lay back down and stared at the ceiling until morning light started filtering through the blinds, too afraid to sleep again, but also too tired to do anything else. On day 3, the school principal called the hospital and asked to speak with Wayne, who came to my room to take the call on speaker so I could hear. The principal confirmed they were providing all records and reports to investigators, including grade sheets going back 3 years, attendance records, and the auditorium video footage from the awards ceremony. Hearing about the video made my stomach drop, because that meant my public breakdown was documented and would be watched by strangers in courtrooms and investigation rooms. Wayne must have seen my face change, because after he hung up, he sat down and said the footage was important evidence. I told him I felt embarrassed that my whole school would forever know this about me, that I'd be the girl who got burned by her mom and announced it on stage. Wayne's response was practical and steady. He said their documentation strengthened the case in ways that couldn't be disputed, that video evidence and institutional records carried weight that personal testimony alone sometimes didn't, and that my courage on that stage had created an undeniable record. I wanted to believe him, but mostly I just felt exposed. Later that afternoon, I asked Wayne how long cases like this usually took from investigation to resolution, and he was honest in a way that made my chest tight. He said it could be months or even longer depending on court schedules, legal maneuvering, and how hard Mom's attorney fought. The dread of a long haul settled into my chest like a stone. Months of waiting, months of not knowing, months of Mom potentially walking around free while the system ground forward at its own pace. Wayne saw my face and added that slow didn't mean uncertain, that building a strong case took time, but thoroughness worked in our favor. I nodded because I understood the logic, but I still felt the weight of endurance ahead of me. He reminded me that I didn't have to carry this alone, that he'd be checking in regularly, and that the investigation team was working steadily even when I couldn't see the progress. I appreciated the reassurance, but I also knew that ultimately, I'd be the one living through every day of waiting. Lying in the hospital bed that night after Wayne left, I made a decision about what my revenge would actually look like. It wouldn't be dramatic or illegal or loud like some movie where I confronted Mom in public or did something reckless that landed me in trouble too. It would be precise and documented and airtight, the kind of case she couldn't talk her way out of or twist with her usual manipulation. I'd use the same perfectionism Mom had drilled into me for 3 years, except this time I'd aim it at building evidence instead of avoiding punishment. Every detail would matter. Every date would be exact. Every incident would be tied to documentation like grade sheets or school events. Nothing would be left to chance or emotion or dramatic gestures. I'd be so thorough and methodical that the legal system would have no choice but to see the truth. The thought settled into my bones with cold clarity. This was how I'd win, not by burning brighter than her, but by being more careful and precise than she ever was. Natasha taught me proper wound care over the next 2 days, showing me how to clean the burns with gentle soap and water, apply the antibiotic cream in thin layers, and wrap the gauze so it stayed secure without cutting off circulation. The routine became almost meditative once I learned the steps. I focused on doing it right for myself this time, not to avoid punishment or meet some impossible standard, but because taking care of my own healing felt like the first small piece of ownership I'd had in years. Natasha watched me practice the technique and corrected my grip when I wrapped too tight, her voice patient and matter-of-fact. She explained what signs of infection to watch for and what healing should look like over the coming weeks. The clinical nature of it helped somehow, like I was learning a skill instead of dwelling on how I got these injuries in the first place. When I finished dressing the burns on my left arm without help, Natasha smiled and said I was doing great. The simple approval without conditions attached made something in my chest crack open just slightly. Word came through Wayne on day 5 that Jasmine's temporary caregiver reported she was physically okay, but very quiet, barely speaking except to ask if I was all right. I exhaled halfway when I heard she was safe, but the worry crept in immediately after. Silence meant something for a kid who used to chatter constantly about everything from cartoon characters to what she wanted for lunch. I asked Wayne if she was getting therapy or someone to talk to, and he confirmed a child psychologist was meeting with her twice a week. The protective panic that had lived in my chest for 3 years shifted shape. but didn't disappear. I wasn't there to shield her anymore. Couldn't monitor what was happening or make sure she was okay. The loss of control felt wrong, even though I knew rationally that professionals were handling it better than I could. I made Wayne promise to tell me if anything changed with her, if she said anything important or seemed worse. He agreed, and I had to trust that the system would protect her now that I couldn't. On day 6, I signed release forms so investigators could access school security footage, my complete medical history, and my academic records going back 3 years. Each signature felt like opening a door I couldn't close, letting strangers see everything about my life that I'd kept hidden behind long sleeves and careful lies. Wayne explained what each form authorized, and I signed them all without hesitation, my hand steady on the pen. I was done with secrets that only protected Mom. If the investigators needed to see every doctor visit where I lied about how I got burned, every grade that triggered punishment, every security camera angle of me walking through school hallways with hidden injuries, then they could have it all. The vulnerability of it made my skin crawl, but the purpose steadied me. This was how I built the case, by letting the truth be documented from every possible angle. My first therapy intake session happened at the end of week 1 with Etienne Schaefer, who specialized in abuse recovery according to the paperwork Wayne gave me. He had an office down the hall from my hospital room and spoke in a calm voice that didn't try too hard to be comforting. He asked basic questions about my age, my school, my family, and then he asked what I wanted to work on in therapy. I admitted out loud that I genuinely believed burning could make me right, that I thought if I punished myself enough for being imperfect, I could fix whatever was broken in me. Hearing myself say it made the distortion clear in a way it never was before, like seeing a funhouse mirror reflection and suddenly understanding it wasn't real. Etienne wrote something down without looking horrified or shocked, just nodded and said that made sense given what I'd been taught. He explained how repeated messages from someone we trust can reshape how we see ourselves, especially when those messages come with physical consequences. The clinical explanation helped somehow, made it less about me being crazy and more about how abuse works on a brain. He said we'd spend time separating Mom's voice from my own thoughts, learning to recognize which beliefs were actually mine. I left that first session feeling raw, but also slightly less alone with the mess inside my head. Detective Paulo Aguilar interviewed me in the hospital room on day 8 with Wayne present as my advocate. Paulo had a notepad and a calm professional manner that reminded me of Wayne's steadiness. He asked me to recount specific incidents with as much detail as I could remember, particularly dates and what triggered each punishment. I told him about the 97% math test that meant 90 seconds over the candle, tied to October 15th of last year. The essay that came back with a 94% on March 3rd that led to the oven incident. The furnace time sessions that happened every time I got below 95%, which I could link to specific report card dates. Paulo took detailed notes and asked clarifying questions without judgment, just gathering facts. He told me my precision and memory were exactly what they needed to build a strong case, that specific dates and correlating evidence made prosecution much more solid. The validation felt strange but good, like the perfectionism that had hurt me for so long was finally useful for something other than avoiding pain. The forensic nurse who had examined me initially came back with her report on day 9 and explained it to Paulo while I listened. She said my scarring patterns were absolutely consistent with inflicted burns rather than self-harm, that the locations and systematic nature indicated external force rather than personal injury. The word inflicted landed in my brain with weight. I let it sit there and started to separate what was done to me from what I believed I deserved. Mom inflicted these burns. Mom chose the candle and the timer and the threats. I didn't earn them through imperfection. I survived them despite everything she did to convince me otherwise. The forensic nurse showed Paulo photographs with annotations marking pattern consistency and healing stages that indicated prolonged systematic abuse. Hearing the clinical language applied to my body felt surreal, but also clarifying, like finally someone was naming the truth without euphemisms or excuses. Dad met with the CPS caseworker on day 10 in a conference room down the hall from my hospital room. Wayne told me afterward that Dad agreed to switch from night shifts to day shifts starting immediately if we got returned to his care. He signed up for parenting classes that begin next week at the community center. The caseworker gave him a packet of information about recognizing abuse signs and protective factors. I watched through the small window as Dad left the meeting with papers in his hand, his shoulders hunched forward like he was carrying weight. Wayne came to my room and told me what happened in simple terms. Dad was taking action instead of just saying sorry over and over. I wasn't ready to forgive him for missing 3 years of burns and punishments, but I could see he was trying to do something real. The effort mattered even if trust was still broken. The assistant district attorney showed up on day 11. Her name was Arabella Moore and she wore a gray suit with a folder tucked under her arm. She sat in the chair next to my hospital bed and explained she was consulting on my case to figure out what charges to file. Wayne stayed in the room as my advocate while she talked. Arabella went through the list of possible charges in a calm voice that made everything sound official and scary at the same time. Aggravated child abuse was the main one. Torture was another word she used. Hearing those words applied to what Mom did made my throat tight. I swallowed hard and tried to keep my face steady. It felt vindicating because someone with legal authority was saying this was real and serious. But it also felt devastating because criminal court meant this wasn't just family drama anymore. It was evidence and testimony and a public record. Arabella asked if I understood what a trial might involve, and I nodded. She told me the process would take months, and I needed to be prepared for that. I said I was ready, even though my hands were shaking under the blankets. The school counselor reached out through Wayne on day 12. She sent a message asking about accommodations for my writing assignments and PE class, since my hands were still wrapped in bandages and healing. Wayne brought me the list of options she suggested. Modified assignments where I could type instead of handwrite. Extra time on tests. Exemption from certain PE activities that might hurt my burns. I looked at the list and felt something unfamiliar. Permission to be imperfect without getting punished for it. For the first time, someone was saying it was okay if I couldn't do everything perfectly because I was hurt. I told Wayne I wanted to try the modified work. He called the counselor back and arranged it all while I sat there feeling like maybe school didn't have to be the place where every mistake got counted and recorded. That afternoon, I asked Natasha for paper and a pen. She brought me a legal pad and I spent 2 hours writing a detailed list of every object Mom used for punishments. The specific candles with the white wax that dripped when they burned too long. The lighter with the blue flame that clicked 3 times before it worked. The fireplace set up in our living room where she made me stand for furnace time, including the metal grate and the way she positioned the chair so I couldn't sit down. I wrote down dates next to each item, matching them to specific assignments and grades. October 15th, 97% math test, white candle, 90 seconds. March 3rd, 94% essay, oven incident, 6 times. I included locations too, which drawer held the lighter, which cabinet stored the candles. The methodical calm I felt while writing everything down was familiar. The same careful attention to detail Mom had drilled into me. But now it was working for me instead of against me. I was building a case with precision, documenting evidence that investigators could search for and find. When I finished the list, it was 3 pages long, single-spaced, every detail exact. I gave it to Wayne and watched him read it with a serious expression. Wayne came back the next morning and told me Jasmine's forensic interview was scheduled for next week. A specialist named Bonnie Rogers would talk to her in a room designed for kids, with cameras recording everything so Jasmine wouldn't have to repeat her story multiple times. Protective dread washed over me when I heard that. I knew my little sister would have to describe what she witnessed, all the times Mom made her watch while I got burned. I wanted to spare her from reliving those memories, but I also knew her testimony was crucial for the case. That conflict sat heavy in my chest like a weight I couldn't shift. Wayne must have seen something on my face because he told me Bonnie was really good at her job, that she knew how to talk to kids without making it worse. I nodded, but the dread didn't go away. Jasmine was only 9 years old and she'd been carrying this secret for years under threat. Now she had to tell strangers about it in detail. I returned to the school in week 2 with my sleeves rolled up by choice. The bandages on my arms were visible, white gauze wrapped around burn scars that people could see if they looked. I was done hiding what Mom did to me. Walking through the hallway felt like moving through a tunnel of whispers. Kids stared and turned to each other, their voices dropping to murmurs when I passed. Some pointed. Others looked away fast like they'd seen something they shouldn't. The whispers hurt, made my skin feel hot under the bandages, but they didn't stop me from walking to my locker. I kept my head up and my arms out where everyone could see. I was claiming my own story instead of letting shame write it for me. At lunch, I sat at my usual table and nobody asked questions directly, but I could feel their eyes on my arms. By the end of the day, I felt tired, but also something like proud. I'd survived being visible. Wayne met with the principal later that week and came to tell me what they discussed. The auditorium video from the award ceremony had been preserved as evidence. The principal confirmed it showed everything. My sleeves sliding down, the scars revealed, me saying into the microphone that I deserved it. I pictured Mom having to watch that video on a screen in front of investigators, or maybe in court. Her hearing my voice say, "I got a 98 on that test. I deserved it," while everyone watched the proof of what she'd done. The quiet satisfaction I felt was cold and focused. Nothing like the hot shame I used to carry. This wasn't about drama or revenge that would hurt me too. This was about documentation, about evidence that couldn't be argued away or explained as anything except what it was. In my next therapy session, Etienne challenged the deserve logic that still lived in my head. He had me list Mom's exact phrases on a piece of paper. Imperfection is imperfection. You're broken and need to be fixed. 3 points from perfect means punishment. I wrote them all down in her voice, the way she used to say them with that tight, disappointed tone. Then Etienne had me go through each phrase and identify which thoughts were actually mine versus which ones were hers that I'd learned to repeat. We mapped it out on paper, drawing lines between her words and my beliefs. Seeing it written out like that made the separation possible for the first time. I could see how her voice had become my internal voice, how I'd started punishing myself because she taught me that's what imperfection deserved. Etienne asked me what I actually believed about myself before Mom started the burning. I couldn't remember that version of me clearly, but I could see now that the deserve logic wasn't mine originally. It was installed. Over the next several therapy sessions, I drafted a personal statement for court. Etienne helped me shape it so it would be powerful without being manipulation. I wrote it calm, precise, factual, with dates and descriptions but no big emotional language. I listed the punishment system, the percentage point calculations, the objects used, the threats about Jasmine. I described the furnace time setup and the escalation pattern over 3 years. I included how I started believing the punishments were right, how I began burning myself because I thought I was broken. Etienne read each draft and helped me cut anything that sounded like I was trying to make people feel sorry for me. The goal was truth told clearly, not a performance. By the 5th draft, I had something that felt solid. Reading it out loud didn't make me cry or shake anymore. I felt purpose replaced the need to make this into something dramatic. This was my testimony, my evidence, my part of building the case. Detective Paolo called me on a Tuesday afternoon. He told me they'd executed a search warrant at our house that morning with both Mom and Dad present. They retrieved everything on my list. The candles, still in the kitchen cabinet where I said they'd be. The lighter with the blue flame from the utility drawer. My graded assignments with Mom's notes written in the margins. Comments about points lost and expectations missed. Even the setup she used for furnace time by the living room fireplace. The metal grate and the positioning of furniture. Paolo's voice was steady as he listed each item. When he finished, I felt sick but also proven right. The physical evidence existed exactly where I said it would be. Mom couldn't explain away objects that matched my burns. Couldn't claim I was lying when the candles and lighter and graded papers all supported my story. Paolo told me this was exactly what they needed. That physical evidence made the case much stronger. I thanked him and hung up, then sat on my hospital bed feeling like the careful documentation had worked. The precision Mom taught me was used against her now, and that felt like the coldest form of justice. 2 days later, Wayne called to tell me Jasmine had completed her forensic interview with Bonnie Rogers. He sat down with me in the hospital day room and gave me an age-appropriate summary, his voice careful and measured. Jasmine had disclosed witnessing multiple punishment sessions over the past year. She described watching Mom hold my hand over candles while counting out loud. She confirmed the threats, the exact words Mom used about perfection, and what would happen if Jasmine didn't measure up. Listening to Wayne's summary made my chest feel like it was crushed from 2 directions at once. Guilt flooded through me because my little sister had to watch that, had to carry those images and that fear while I was too focused on surviving to protect her properly. But underneath the guilt burned something hotter and sharper. Protective rage filled the spaces where shame used to live. Mom had threatened Jasmine. Mom had used my sister as leverage to keep me quiet and compliant. That calculation, that willingness to extend the damage, made my hands shake with anger instead of pain for the first time in years. That same week, Mom started trying to reach me through relatives. An aunt I barely knew called Dad's phone with a message saying Mom just wanted to explain, that I was misunderstanding her intentions, that if I'd only listened, she could make me see it differently. Dad's face went hard when he heard the voicemail. He called Wayne immediately and reported the contact attempt without even asking me first. Wayne updated the no contact order documentation and warned the relatives that any further messages would be considered violations. I refused any contact, blocked numbers I didn't recognize, and felt something close to pride settle in my bones. Holding this boundary felt powerful, even though part of me still wanted to believe Mom might actually apologize. That small, hopeful part of me was stupid and I knew it, but it existed anyway, whispering that maybe she'd realize what she'd done and feel sorry. I ignored that voice and focused on the fact that I was saying no to her for the first time in 3 years. The next afternoon, Arabella Moore came to the hospital and sat down across from me with her briefcase and her stern expression. She warned me in a voice that left no room for argument not to post anything on social media or attempt to confront Mom directly. My revenge had to be admissible in court, not explosive or emotional. No dramatic call-out posts, no public accusations beyond what was already witnessed at the award ceremony, no attempts to contact Mom even to tell her off. Arabella explained that anything I did outside proper legal channels could be used against me, could make me look unstable or vindictive, could undermine the careful case we were building. The frustration of being told to stay quiet made my jaw clench. I wanted to scream about what Mom had done, wanted everyone to know, wanted to control the narrative myself. But I swallowed that impulse and redirected the energy into making my documentation even more thorough. I went back to my hospital room and added more details to my timeline, cross-referenced dates with school calendars, made my evidence unshakable instead of loud. A few days after that, Dad texted me photos of a modest 2-bedroom apartment he was touring for our potential placement. The images showed plain white walls, basic appliances, clean but not obsessively spotless spaces. One photo showed a small living room with a couch that had a visible stain on one cushion. Another showed a kitchen with mismatched cabinet handles. I stared at those photos for a long time, noticing what Dad had chosen to show me. He picked a place that was plain and clean but not perfect. No pristine surfaces, no carefully staged perfection, just functional and safe. The fact that he was thinking about what kind of environment would feel comfortable instead of impressive made something in my chest loosen slightly. Trust didn't flood in, but it inched forward a tiny bit. Dad was trying to show me through actions that he understood what mattered now. In my next therapy session, Etienne suggested I start what he called a mistake journal. The concept was simple but felt impossible at first. Log small errors I made each day without any punishment or fixing, just acknowledgement. Write them down, note what happened, and then move on without consequences. I started that same day with a cheap notebook from the hospital gift shop. Spilled juice at breakfast. Forgot to return a library book on time. Mixed up 2 homework problems. Got an answer wrong on a quiz. Each entry felt like touching a hot stove on purpose. That same flinch of anticipated pain. But no punishment came. No candles, no counting, no furnace time. Just words on paper that I could look at later and see that I'd survived imperfection. The act of recording mistakes without consequence created small moments of pride that surprised me. I was building evidence that errors didn't have to mean pain. Back at the school the following week, some classmates cornered me by my locker with questions that felt like knives. What happened to your arms? Did your mom really do that? Is it true you burned yourself? Their voices carried that particular tone of curiosity mixed with horror that made me feel like a spectacle. I answered honestly once, keeping my voice flat and factual. My mother punished me for academic imperfection by burning me over 3 years. Now there's a criminal investigation. That's all I'm going to say about it. Then I set a clear boundary by telling them if they wanted more details, they could ask the school counselor. But I wasn't going to be their trauma entertainment. The assertiveness felt foreign in my mouth, like speaking a language I'd only just learned. But most people backed off after that, and the ones who didn't got redirected by teachers who'd clearly been briefed on the situation. I walked to class feeling shaky but stronger, like I'd claimed some small piece of control over my own story. 3 weeks into the investigation, Paolo called with an update about Mom's defense strategy. Her attorney was claiming cultural perfectionism and high academic standards rather than abuse, trying to frame the whole thing as strict parenting taken too far by an immigrant mother who didn't understand American norms. I felt my lip curl when Paolo explained this because I could see exactly what Mom was doing. This was branding and image management, not actual belief. Mom's punishments were never about teaching or cultural values or helping me succeed. They were about control, about having power over someone smaller and weaker, about feeding whatever broke inside her that needed to hurt me. The cultural perfectionism angle was just another lie, another carefully constructed story designed to make her look sympathetic instead of cruel. I told Paolo exactly that and he wrote it down, noting that my ability to see through the manipulation would be useful in court. The school counselor scheduled a meeting to review my grades history from the past 3 years. We sat in her small office with printouts spread across the desk, laying out the trend lines that showed my performance increasing, while the documented injuries escalated. My GPA went from 3, 7 to 3, 9 to 4, 0 over 3 years. My test scores climbed steadily higher, but the medical records showed burns treated at urgent care 3 times, PE excuses for hand injuries 6 times, and the final hospitalization with extensive scarring. The counselor traced the lines with her finger, showing me how the pattern made it undeniable that punishment didn't improve anything. It just hurt me while I succeeded despite the pain, not because of it. Seeing the data from outside my own experience made something click into place. I'd spent years believing the burning was necessary for excellence, that without it I'd fail. But the numbers proved I was excellent on my own, and the burning only added suffering. By mid-October, the preliminary hearing date got set for 6 weeks out. I spent hours with Etienne rehearsing my personal statement until I could deliver it aloud without shaking or crying. We practiced in his office with me sitting in a chair that faced him like he was a judge. I read through the statement over and over, adjusting words that felt too emotional or too flat, finding the exact tone that sounded like I was giving a report instead of performing trauma. The goal was calm competence, factual recitation, controlled delivery. Etienne timed me and gave feedback on my pacing and eye contact. After the 5th run-through, I could feel the statement settling into my bones like armor. This was my testimony, my evidence, my part of building the case, and I was going to deliver it like the precision instrument Mom had trained me to be. Dad sent me a text with an update after completing his first parenting class. He'd started individual therapy too, and wanted me to know he was learning about emotional awareness and protective factors he'd missed. The text was brief and factual. No dramatic apologies or promises, just information about what he was doing. I read it twice and felt something complicated happen in my chest. I didn't forgive him yet and maybe wouldn't for a long time. But I noticed the consistent effort, the classes attended and therapy sessions completed, and updates sent without being asked. That was more than empty apologies would give me. Action mattered more than words, and Dad was taking action even though it was slow, and the outcome wasn't guaranteed. The supervised visit with Jasmine happened 2 weeks later in a small room at the CPS office with a caseworker sitting in the corner taking notes. Jasmine sat across from me at a table with coloring supplies spread between us, her hands moving a purple crayon in slow circles while she avoided eye contact. I watched her color for a minute before she finally looked up and asked in a small voice if perfection still mattered to me. The question hit harder than I expected, because I could hear the fear underneath it, the worry that maybe I'd become like Mom in some different way. I leaned forward and told her firmly that perfection doesn't matter in our house anymore. Not ever again. And I watched something shift in her expression. She didn't look completely convinced, but her shoulders dropped a little, and she went back to coloring with slightly looser strokes. Sitting there watching her, I realized I was stepping into a role I never had before, being the one who sets the rules and protects, instead of the one who gets hurt. The responsibility felt heavy, but also right in a way I couldn't fully explain. Back at the school the following week, I overheard 2 girls in the bathroom talking about how Mom's attorney was telling people I was unstable and troubled, that the whole thing was being blown out of proportion. The gossip had already spread through mutual acquaintances and reached the school network, and I could feel eyes on me differently in the hallways. My first instinct was to scream and defend myself publicly, to stand up in the cafeteria and tell everyone exactly what Mom did with dates and details. Instead, I remembered what Arabella told me about staying silent and letting the documented evidence speak, so I walked past the bathroom conversation without saying anything. The anger burned hot in my chest, but I channeled it into organizing my case files that night, checking that every piece of evidence was properly labeled and dated. If Mom wanted to play the credibility game, I had 3 years of medical records and forensic photos that didn't care about gossip. The preliminary hearing arrived on a cold morning in late November, with metal detectors at the courthouse entrance, and security officers checking bags. I walked through the detector with Dad beside me and followed Arabella down a hallway to a small courtroom with wooden benches and fluorescent lights. Mom sat at the defense table with her attorney, wearing a navy dress that looked carefully chosen to appear respectable, and I felt my stomach twist when I saw her. I took my seat at the prosecution table and kept my eyes fixed on Judge Valeria Espinoza at the front of the room, refusing to give Mom the satisfaction of eye contact or any visible sign that seeing her affected me. The judge called the hearing to order, and I sat perfectly still with my hands folded on the table, breathing slowly through my nose the way Etienne taught me. Mom tried to catch my eye twice during the opening statements, but I stared straight ahead at the judge, maintaining the boundary I'd set for myself. When Arabella called me to testify, I walked to the witness stand and placed my hand on the Bible for the oath with my scarred fingers visible to everyone in the courtroom. I explained the perfection points burning system in clear detail, describing how 3 points off a test meant 90 seconds holding my hand over a lit candle while Mom counted. I walked through the math of punishment, how every mistake got calculated and every imperfection earned its exact measure of pain. Arabella introduced the forensic photographs on a screen, and I watched the courtroom go still as images of my arms and back appeared in high resolution. Then she played the auditorium video from the awards ceremony, and my voice filled the room saying I got a 98 on that test and deserved it, followed by my recorded statement that I was broken and born broken and needed to be fixed. I watched faces in the gallery react to hearing those words in my own voice. The way the certainty in my tone made it clear I'd believed every word. The defense attorney objected twice during my testimony, but Judge Espinoza overruled both times, and I kept my delivery steady and factual throughout. During cross-examination, the defense attorney stood up and immediately pushed the self-harm narrative, suggesting I was depressed and hurting myself while Mom desperately tried to get me help. He asked if I'd ever been diagnosed with mental health issues, and whether I understood that troubled teens sometimes hurt themselves for attention. I stayed completely calm and waited for him to finish before responding with Mom's exact words, telling him that imperfection is imperfection, and those were her rules. Then I stated clearly that these were her rules, these were my scars, and I could tell him exactly which assignment earned which burn if he wanted the complete list. He tried to interrupt, but I kept talking, explaining that the burn on my left wrist came from a 96 on a history quiz, and the cluster of marks on my right forearm came from a math test, where I got 2 word problems wrong. The precision of my memory seemed to throw him off his strategy, and he sat down after only 10 minutes of cross-examination. Bonnie Rogers' recorded interview with Jasmine got played next, and the entire courtroom went absolutely silent when my little sister's voice came through the speakers. Jasmine described watching me hold my hand over flames while Mom counted out loud, her voice shaking as she explained how Mom told her she'd be next if she wasn't perfect. The recording included Jasmine saying she was scared to tell anyone because Mom said they'd split up the family and it would be her fault. Listening to my sister's testimony made pain and certainty fight in my chest, the guilt of what she witnessed mixing with relief that she finally told the truth. I kept my eyes on the table in front of me and breathed through the urge to cry, knowing that falling apart now wouldn't help anyone. Judge Espinoza took less than 5 minutes to continue the no-contact order without any hesitation, stating clearly that the evidence presented showed a pattern of systematic abuse that required ongoing protection. She set a trial window for 3 months out and outlined the conditions that would remain in place until then. Mom stared at me from across the courtroom during the judge's statement, trying to make eye contact and communicate something I couldn't read. I didn't give it to her, keeping my gaze fixed on Judge Espinoza throughout, and the satisfaction I felt was quiet and sober. This wasn't about victory or celebration. It was about boundaries held and protection maintained. After the hearing, Arabella pulled Dad aside to explain that he'd been granted temporary custody pending full CPS review. The conditions included continued therapy for both of us, regular home checks every 2 weeks, and mandatory completion of all parenting classes before the arrangement could become permanent. Dad nodded through each requirement and signed the paperwork without hesitation. The relief I felt was complicated, threaded through with caution and conditions, but it was still relief because I wasn't going to a group home. We'd be living together in his new apartment with rules and oversight, but we'd be together. Move-in day happened the following Saturday with Dad's truck parked outside a modest apartment building on the east side of town. I carried boxes up 2 flights of stairs and chose the smaller bedroom that had a window facing the parking lot. The room had cream-colored walls with a small paint drip near the ceiling that the previous tenant had left unfixed, and I deliberately decided not to ask Dad to cover it. Leaving that imperfection visible in my space felt like quiet defiance, a small way of practicing the freedom to accept things that weren't perfect. I unpacked my clothes into the closet and arranged my desk without obsessing over exact angles, letting books sit slightly crooked and papers stack unevenly. Each small act of accepting messiness felt like reclaiming something Mom had taken. Therapy with Etienne deepened over the next few sessions as we worked on identifying specific triggers that sent me into panic mode. We made a list together, writing down open flames, grades marked in red pen and clocks showing 6:55 p.m. as the big ones. I started tracking my reactions in the mistake journal whenever I encountered a trigger, noting what happened and how long it took me to calm down. Etienne explained that naming triggers helped me predict and manage them instead of being caught off guard by sudden panic. The tracking became another form of precision, but this time it was precision that served my healing instead of my punishment. I could see patterns forming in my responses, and that visibility gave me a sense of control I hadn't felt in years. 3 days later, Detective Paolo called my cell while I was doing homework at the kitchen table and told me Mom had violated the no-contact order. A relative I barely knew, some second cousin on her side, sent me a Facebook message saying Mom just wanted to meet and talk things through. I forwarded the screenshot to Paolo immediately, and he explained this actually helped the case because it showed Mom couldn't follow court orders even with criminal charges pending. My anger shifted from hot and scattered to focused and useful, like I finally had a tool that did something instead of just burning through me. Paolo logged the violation in his report and copied Arabella so she could use it for the upcoming bail review hearing. The next week, I sat in Arabella's office going over my victim impact statement line by line, and she coached me on keeping my tone measured instead of emotional. I practiced reading it out loud while she timed me and made notes about pacing. The work felt like channeling Mom's perfectionism into something that served justice instead of control, using precision as a weapon rather than a punishment. Arabella stopped me twice to cut sentences that sounded too angry, and once to add a specific medical detail that made the pattern clearer. By the third practice run, I could deliver the whole thing without my voice shaking or speeding up. The school invited me to sit in on a staff meeting about mandated reporting and recognizing abuse signs, and I agreed because the counselor said it might help other kids. I listened to the principal and a CPS trainer go through warning signs and documentation procedures for 40 minutes. At the end, when they asked if I had anything to add, I said one sentence. See us, even when we're good at hiding. Several teachers wiped their eyes and the principal thanked me, and I left feeling like maybe my experience could actually protect someone else. The following afternoon, I handed Arabella my final victim impact statement with a line I'd worked on for days. I learned perfection from her. Now I'm using it to document. She read through the whole thing standing at her desk, then looked up and told me it was exactly what the court needed to hear, because it was clear and powerful and impossible to dismiss. I felt pride that had nothing to do with grades or achievement, just the satisfaction of building something solid. The bail review hearing happened in month 4 on a Tuesday morning with courtroom security and closed proceedings. Arabella argued to revoke Mom's bail based on the no-contact violation, while the defense pushed for treatment programs instead of custody. I sat in the gallery with my hands folded in my lap, managing my nerves by focusing on my breathing the way Etienne had taught me during our last session. When my turn came, I walked to the witness stand and took the oath with my right hand raised. I read my impact statement to Judge Espinoza without theatrics or crying, just schedule tables showing punishment times and medical appointment records and the math of pain calculated over 3 years. The delivery was ice over fire, deliberate and controlled, and I watched the judge's expression harden as I spoke. I included the percentage point system and the escalation pattern, and Jasmine's testimony about threats. When I finished, the courtroom stayed quiet for a few seconds before Arabella thanked me and I returned to my seat. Judge Espinoza didn't revoke bail, but she tightened conditions significantly, adding electronic monitoring and stricter no-contact provisions with criminal consequences for any violations. It wasn't the outcome I wanted, but it was a measured response that showed the court took this seriously. I accepted that partial progress was still progress, and that the legal system moved in careful steps instead of dramatic victories. That evening, Dad asked if we could talk after Jasmine went to bed, and we sat at the kitchen table with mugs of tea neither of us drank. He apologized without excuses or justifications, saying simply that he should have seen it, and should have protected me, and he was sorry. I accepted the apology but told him clearly that sorry didn't erase what happened, only consistent action rebuilt trust. He nodded with understanding instead of getting defensive, and I saw him actually hear what I said instead of just waiting to respond. The next morning, Jasmine slept through the night without nightmares for the first time since everything came out. Dad made pancakes to market, but we didn't turn it into some big, perfect celebration with balloons or speeches. We just ate breakfast together and acknowledged quietly that small wins mattered. Jasmine smiled with syrup on her chin, and asked for seconds, and the normal moment felt more valuable than any grand gesture. Later that week, I met with the school counselor to design a reduced load week system I could use during trauma flare-ups when concentrating felt impossible. We mapped out a plan where I could request modified assignments and extended deadlines during bad weeks without penalty. Having official accommodations that recognized my reality without calling me broken felt like self-advocacy becoming normal instead of shameful, like I was learning to ask for what I needed without apologizing for needing it. Etienne gave me homework during our next session that made my stomach twist into knots. He wanted me to turn in one assignment with a small mistake I could fix but chose not to, then sit with the feeling of leaving it imperfect. I picked my English worksheet that night and found a sentence where I'd written there instead of there in the second paragraph. My hand hovered over it with my pen ready to fix it for probably 5 minutes straight. The urge to correct it felt like an itch I couldn't scratch, like something crawling under my skin that needed to be made right. I forced myself to close the folder and walk away from my desk. The anxiety followed me around the apartment that whole evening, this buzzing electric feeling in my chest that kept telling me to go back and fix it. I didn't sleep well that night because I kept thinking about that one wrong word sitting in my folder. But the next morning, when I handed in the worksheet with the error still there, I felt this weird, edgy pride that I'd survived the discomfort without giving in. It wasn't the same as the satisfaction of getting everything perfect, but it was something new, something that felt like it belonged to me instead of Mom. The following week, I got my math test back with a 94 marked at the top in red pen. One of my answers was smudged where my hand had dragged across the pencil marks, and the partial credit made the problem only half right. My first instinct hit me like a reflex. This immediate need to ask the teacher for a retake, or at least to explain what I meant before the smudge happened. I stood up from my desk with the paper in my hand, ready to walk to the front of the room. Then I stopped myself halfway out of my seat and sat back down. I looked at that smudged answer and the points I'd lost, and I made myself keep the paper exactly as it was. I slid it into my folder right behind the English worksheet with the wrong word, and the two imperfect assignments sat there together like proof of something. The muscle memory of accepting the mistake instead of fighting it felt completely new, like learning to write with my other hand. It was uncomfortable and wrong, but also kind of amazing because I was choosing it instead of having it forced on me. Arabella called Dad's phone a few days later with an update on the legal timeline. She put it on speaker so I could hear too, and her voice came through clear and professional like always. The trial date was likely still months away because the court calendar was packed and both sides were still exchanging evidence. She said a plea deal was possible if Mom's attorney wanted to negotiate, but nothing was locked in or guaranteed with the legal system. I felt this heavy patience settle into my chest as she talked, the understanding that justice moved slowly, and I couldn't speed it up no matter how much I wanted to. The only thing I could actually control was my own healing, not the timeline of courts and lawyers and paperwork. Dad thanked her for the update and we hung up, and I went back to my homework without the usual spike of anger about waiting. Learning to sit with uncertainty without trying to force an outcome felt like another small piece of progress. That weekend I drafted a letter for the court's pre-sentence packet that would get used whether Mom took a plea deal or got convicted after a trial. I wrote it on my laptop at the kitchen table with Dad making dinner in the background. The letter laid out specific incidents with dates, and described how the punishments affected my daily life and my ability to trust people. I kept my tone factual and clear without trying to make it sound dramatic or overly emotional. Having it prepared without being attached to which path the case would take felt like thinking ahead in a mature way instead of just reacting to whatever happened. I emailed it to Arabella when I finished, and she responded within an hour saying it was exactly the right approach and she'd include it in the packet. The practical planning gave me something to do with my hands and my brain that felt useful instead of just waiting around. A few nights later, Dad and I sat down together after Jasmine went to bed, and we wrote house rules on notebook paper. We came up with things like, mistakes are for learning, and grades don't determine worth, and asking for help is being strong, not weak. Each rule we wrote down felt like claiming what kind of home we wanted to build, instead of just living in the shadow of what Mom had created. We used magnets to stick the paper on the fridge when we finished, right where everyone could see it every day. Taking ownership of our space and deciding together what values mattered felt like building something completely new from the ground up. Dad's handwriting was messier than mine on the list, and normally that would have bothered me, but I left it alone because the imperfection made it feel more real and honest. Jasmine cornered me in the hallway the next afternoon with her arms wrapped around herself and her voice small and worried. She asked if she'd have to testify at trial, if she'd have to sit in a courtroom and say everything again in front of strangers. I could see the fear in her shoulders and the way she couldn't quite look at me when she asked. Dad came out of his room and we explained together that her forensic interview with Bonnie already counted as testimony, that she'd done her part and it was enough. We told her the recording could be used in court, so she didn't have to be there in person unless she wanted to be. The relief that went through her whole body was visible, her shoulders dropping and her face relaxing for the first time since she'd asked. I realized right then that protecting her from more trauma was something I could actually do, something concrete and real that made a difference. 2 weeks later, I was making tea in the kitchen when I brushed my hand against the hot kettle by accident. The burn was minor, just a small red mark on the side of my palm, but the moment it happened, I felt my whole body tense up waiting for the panic to hit. Instead of freaking out, I walked calmly to the bathroom and treated it with the wound care supplies Natasha had taught me to use during my hospital stay. I cleaned it properly, applied the right ointment, covered it with a small bandage. Then I wrote it down in my phone notes as a trigger to bring up in my next therapy session. My hands stayed steady the whole time and my breathing stayed normal. The fact that I could handle a burn trigger without falling apart showed me I was learning to deal with things that used to completely break me. It was just a tiny burn, but it felt like passing a test I didn't know I was taking. CPS showed up for a scheduled home check in month 5 on a Thursday afternoon. The caseworker walked through our apartment with her clipboard, looking at the bedrooms and bathroom and kitchen. Our place was modest and safe and lived in, with some imperfect paint on the walls and a comfortable level of mess that came from actual people living their lives. There were dishes in the sink from breakfast and Jasmine's backpack dumped by the couch and Dad's work boots by the door. The caseworker made notes and asked a few questions about our routines and how things were going. At the end, she said everything looked good and appropriate, that she could see this was a functional home environment. Her approval felt like someone official was validating that good enough was actually good enough, that we didn't need everything to be a perfect show for it to count as okay. During my next therapy session with Etienne, I brought my mistake journal and opened it to page 1. I read the first entries out loud, the ones from early on where I'd written things like spilled juice, felt sick all day, and forgot homework question, wanted to hurt myself. Then I flipped to the most recent page and read those entries, things like wrong word on worksheet, felt anxious but okay, and smudged test answer, kept it anyway. The difference in how I reacted to mistakes was so clear when I heard it out loud like that. Etienne pointed out that visible growth didn't need perfection, just honest effort over time, and I actually believed him when he said it. The journal was proof that I was changing in ways I could measure and see, even when it didn't feel dramatic or obvious day to day. Arabella reached out again near the end of month 5 with news that Mom's attorney was floating the idea of a plea deal. She didn't give me details yet because nothing was official, just said it was on the table as a possibility. I didn't celebrate or fall apart when I heard it. I'd learned to hold this balanced stance where I wanted justice and accountability, but I understood the legal system had its own weird logic and timing that I couldn't control. Whatever happened would happen based on evidence and negotiations and court procedures, not based on how much I wanted a specific outcome. The steady patience I felt was different from giving up. It was more like accepting that some things take as long as they take, and pushing doesn't make them move faster. A week after that conversation with Arabella, I walked through the grocery store looking for something specific. I passed the fancy houseplants near the floral section and headed straight for the clearance rack by the back wall. There was a small pothos plant in a plastic pot, marked down because half its leaves were already browning at the edges. The tag said it needed moderate water and would drop leaves if you gave it too much. Perfect. I bought it for $3 and carried it home in a paper bag, setting it on the windowsill in my bedroom where it got indirect light. The care instructions were simple, but I had to fight my instincts every single day. My hands wanted to water it constantly, check the soil every hour, measure everything precisely. Instead, I forced myself to water it once a week and leave it alone the rest of the time. When leaves turned yellow and fell off, I picked them up and threw them away without panicking or trying to fix what I'd done wrong. The plant kept growing anyway, putting out new vines even though it wasn't perfect. Learning to let something be imperfect and still alive became my practice in doing less instead of more. That evening, the three of us sat at our scratched kitchen table doing homework together. Dad worked on his GED practice test, while Jasmine colored a map for social studies, and I finished a history worksheet. There were no timers set, no candles anywhere in the apartment, no inspection happening at 6:55. Jasmine erased something on her map and the rubber smudged the paper, but she just shrugged and kept coloring. Dad got a practice question wrong and circled it to review later without any shame on his face. I wrote an answer that wasn't quite right, crossed it out, and wrote a better one. The clock on the wall ticked forward at its normal pace while we worked, and nobody was counting seconds or calculating punishments. We were just three people doing homework at our own speed, building something careful and scarred but also learning to breathe.